All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine Women and Words. I am Michelle, and with me, of course, is Diana.
Hello.
And this is our April. Mentally, I've already jumped ahead into the month of May, so I forgot what month we were in. This is our April book of the month, which, of course, we have been reading Marvelous by Molly Greeley. And it's just going to be an hour-long historical fiction nerd out session. That's just what tonight is going to be.
Those are my
So
favorite.
thank you so
I
much.
absolutely.
Right? This is definitely like you have entered the nerd realm this evening, Molly. So thank you for making time for us and entering into our domain.
Well,
That
thank you
sounds
for
creepy.
having me in your domain. We're not evil scientists at all. No, don't worry about
No, no.
No.
I blame this headache thing that I have today. My words are not what they should be. This is my going to be my default for the next hour.
Oh, it's gonna be fun.
But and I do have tea steeping in the other room that will be brought to me when the timer goes off. I'm very excited for it. But anyway, so we of course have been reading Marvelous, and to dive in, I would love to start at the very lost my words, very beginning with like the first introduction that we have to this novel, which of course is the title. How did Marvelous come about? How did you decide on the title for the story?
This was one of the few book titles that I submitted that for any of my books that actually stuck, where the publisher did not tell me absolutely not. So it did have a lot of working titles that were not great. And honestly, I don't remember exactly how Marvelous came to be. It was more like I would look at the document that I was working on and see how clunky whatever title it was on it was. And marvelous was a word that kept popping up as I wrote because the people in the book were considered human marvels. They were physically unusual. They were called marvels, and then of course I found this quote from Aristotle, who was someone that one of my main characters, studied at the time. And Aristotle said something about, in all things of nature, there's something of the marvelous. And I believe it was when I read that it kind of clicked for me, that just seemed like the right title. It would kind of encompassed who these people were, their unusual lives, and the kind of bittersweet love story that they had also, marriage.
I love that we get to talk about the title and choosing the titles, because so often new writers, and if you're a new writer listening, don't stress about your title. In all seriousness, you don't get to stress about it. You come up with the best title possible in your head that you can think of, but there are going to be a team of people sitting in your publisher's office going, okay, so how do we want to best market this book?
Yeah.
It's not always going to be up to you for the titles of your book.
As with so much else, I feel like that goes into the marketing of a book. I mean, there's a whole team of people whose entire job it is to decide how to present it. So, like, rewriters might have a vision, but it might not be the marketing vision.
Exactly. And I feel like as writers, our job is to write books. We are not supposed to be, as you and I spoke about this earlier off camera, basically, our job is not to be the marketers. While it's one of the hats that we have to wear begrudgingly, we are not the ones who have to specialize in it. That's why you've got the publishers and your PR people who are supposed to be the ones that are good at your publishing and marketing. I know for Antoinette's sister, that was not my first choice for the title. I had another title in mind that I wanted, and the marketing department was like, overruled me on everything. And they're like, we're going with this because she's related to Marie Antoinette and you don't get a choice.
Yep. And I think it's interesting because sometimes, there have been a couple of times when I've worked with a publisher and like for something like the cover, and they've you know, and like, what do you think of this? What ideas do you have? And sometimes, you'll give them your ideas and they're actually receptive to it. And sometimes they'll say, well, that's kind of too bad. Like they don't actually say that. That's basically like the gist of it. So it's just what the game is.
Sometimes it just feels like it's a formality where they're just going to pat you on the head and they'll be like,
Yes.
oh, that is a really cute idea, you little author. That's just so cute. You go back and play with your pens and your paper, and we're gonna go over here with the big kids and make the decisions.
I felt very lucky with Marvelous because they actually gave me two really pretty covers as like options, which I'd never had options before, not really. And then my agent and I wanted to tweak one of them a little bit and like take elements from one and add it to the other and move things around. And I mean, nothing we wanted to do was that drastic, so maybe that's why we didn't get overruled. But they were pretty accommodating actually this time around. It was nice.
Yeah, and I mean, I love Brand Central, which is the imprint of my publisher that I'm with, having that marketing department, or not the marketing department, but past the marketing department discussion here, the art department having those, being able to come up with such beautiful book covers.
Incredible. I don't know how I don't have that kind of mind, so
Yeah, they knocked it out of the park for both of my book covers. I love both of them.
Yeah, that's
and Marvelous is a gorgeous book cover.
It is a beautiful book cover.
I do love it. I feel so lucky that they went in the direction that they chose to go in.
Yeah. It is one of those cases where you can judge the book by the cover.
Yeah, I was just saying that the other day, that it's really interesting that that's a saying, because that is not always, but a good chunk of time, that's what we do when we go to bookstores, is we judge the books by their cover.
Exactly. And I think that's why, at least for me as a writer, like if there's a cover that doesn't seem appropriate for the story, whether it's for my book or another book that I read, and then I look at the cover, I'm like, where did this come from? And I'm sure it was something to do with marketing that I don't understand, but it always just kind of feels like, well, I wouldn't have picked this up maybe if or there are other books that I feel like maybe I would have picked up if they'd had a different cover. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like that's the case in quite a few of the books, both on both sides of the equation for me, that I've come across, where it's like, oh, this cover just looks so gorgeous, I'm gonna pick it up and read it, and it's like, oh no, this was not a book for me.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, where it's like, I just absolutely love the book, but the cover, just, they could have done a better job.
Right. Yeah. Just doesn't speak to you somehow.
So now moving in, I feel like this is going to be like a very organized discussion for now. We have our
Until I get my
tangents.
hands on it, until I start picking over.
I was researching and preparing for tonight, and your first two books were, okay, I completely blanked on what era. I even put in my questions, insert Pride and Prejudice years in this question, because I can't remember. I could have looked it up, but I didn't.
It's like
moving.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So your first your previous two books were set in the Regency era in England, and you moved for Marvelous to France and Italy in the 1600s, which of course is a completely different era, completely different countries, different political landscapes, royalty, everything. What was that like from a writing standpoint, to shift your mind into, okay, well, that word wouldn't be used in this book, or this fashion wouldn't be used, this is what they would wear, making those kind of changes during the writing process?
That's a really good question. I mean, because for me, the Regency era, as someone who, basically grew up reading Jane Austen and Jane Austen adjacent books and watching the period pieces, period movies. And I felt like I could visualize the era really well. And then with the Renaissance in France and Italy, you know, I had some knowledge, but not nearly as much. And so I did a lot of research beforehand. I spent a lot of time on websites looking at like there are like YouTube videos, you know, of women undressing basically the way they would have, because I have a scene in Marvelous where she's you know, she's being undressed in preparation for her wedding night, and I was like, okay, what would come off first? What would, like, what are all the things called? And so I just watched all of these amazing, you know, reenactors who do these videos, and I ended up reading a lot of books set in that time period, and watching movies, whatever movies I could find, just to kind of get myself in that headspace and out of the Regency. Because for me, at least, it's very hard to write if I don't feel like I'm in the place that I'm writing about. It's just very, very difficult.
I can understand that. And I love the fact that you use the movies to help set that headspace for it. That's something that I do too. And I like to point out to writers often that television isn't always the devil when it comes to our writing career. Sometimes you need to have that visual and that auditory senses to help you, especially if it's a period piece.
I definitely agree, because I mean, none of us, yeah, especially if it's a period piece, none of us lived then. We don't know exactly what it was like, and a movie may or may not be exactly accurate. They definitely vary in that respect, but they can give you like a taste of it, of the ambiance or whatever. Yeah.
And there was, you mentioned the scene of her getting ready for her wedding night, and I wish I should have had the book with me, but there was one garment that I wish I could remember the name of that she stepped out of, and it was like a garment whose name I had never heard before.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's new. I've never heard that one before.
I have the book, but I don't know whether I can find that very quickly. But I'm trying to think. I know there was a farthingale. I remember that.
That's what it was. I had never heard of a farthingale before.
Yeah. And so that was one of those things where I was this, you know, lovely woman on YouTube who just was like completely into Renaissance clothing. And so she was like, these are what the undergarments would have been. This is what would go on next. And, you know, probably I would have had a maid to help me with this, but right now it's very, I have to do it. It's like, thank goodness for YouTube sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah. And those reenactors that have all of the period accurate clothing, I mean, it's beautiful what they wear, but gosh, I could not imagine putting all that on every single day.
No, I can't either. I feel like that's always my thought when I watch these kinds of things. It's just this huge production. There's layer after layer.
I mean, as it is, when I go to a Renaissance fair, I wear a corset, and I cannot imagine wearing that for more than like 8 hours.
So that's something I've always wondered about, because I have heard women claim that, you know, they're like, if a corset is well fitted, it's actually very comfortable. And is it? Because I just have trouble imagining.
It's so the thing about wearing a corset, it's really great for your back. If it's well fitted, it's great for your back. And it has to be, you know, tied just right. And there are pictures of myself just bracing and my husband's just tying it as so there are those pictures that probably will never see the light of day. But if it is done properly, which, you know, there was a controversy with Bridgerton actresses and the degrading of costuming within these streaming shows, because that's where they're cutting their corners, is with costuming. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so a proper corset, well fitted, when I say well fitted, they're taking your measurements. I've had one that was literally fit for me, where it was called a duct tape bodice, where you take a t-shirt and then they take duct tape and you get wrapped in duct tape, and that is what is used. And then they cut it up the middle, and that is what is used to pattern your bodice.
Wow.
Based on that. And actually, yeah, and the boning that's put in, there has to be proper boning. It has to be done really well. And there is an art to it. And there are some beautiful ones that are out there that are properly done. I'm not talking about the Victoria's Secret ones or the Fredericks of Hollywood ones, though they do have some nice ones. But there are clothing designers out there doing these really, really nice ones. And a proper corset, man, my back has never been so straight.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and even still, there's that moment of, like, we went to the Renaissance Festival in early April, and I wore it, and it had to have been no more than, it was almost 8 hours. It was almost 8 hours that we were there technically. And I had it on, and by the end, I was still like, get this thing off of me. Like, I had a momentary panic of that, like, things were like, it wasn't coming together, and I was like panicking, just get it off me. Just because you also, because it is so constricting, and the benefit is your back and everything is nice, but it does constrict sometimes your breathing ability. And yeah, it's kind of important. I mean, you still are supposed to breathe, but if you want to take deep breaths, you can't necessarily do it. And and it's just like with the women who wore it every single day, they had deformed organs. They had deformed rib cages at the bottom. It was this whole thing. So it's not it's something that is designed for the modern woman, and thank God we have bras now.
Right.
And I mean, sometimes
short,
jeans are too much to ask for on some days.
Yes.
So I don't know how wearing all of that every day, I could not do that.
No, they would have had to have been just, you just imagine they must have been miserable, but I don't know. If you don't know anything different.
Yeah, if you don't know anything different, how do you know? And then also on the other side of things, when women would faint quite a bit, and the heat and stuff, it's because they put us in these damn corsets all the time.
Well, that's why women were considered so delicate to some extent.
Because they couldn't breathe.
Because we were wrapped in these torture devices for 8 hours or more at a time.
Oh my gosh.
All for the name of fashion. So one of the things I want to shift towards is historical research. And I also want to take into account, like, how much of the fairy tale was considered for this story.
So I came across this while I was researching something entirely different, and it was, and this website that basically said something like, find out the true story behind Beauty and the Beast. So that got my attention. What I found when I started researching this couple is that their story in some ways parallels the fairy tale, in that, this man who was covered all in hair because he had hypertrichosis, this genetic condition. He was married off by Catherine de Medici in order to, she wanted to breed more people who were covered all in hair. And so this young girl who was a merchant's daughter, and one source that I found said that he was the draper to the queen, was at least one of his jobs. And she was, given to him essentially. And so it was, and I don't know, I made it a little bit more of a parallel in the novel, because I decided to have the father's, business go bust, basically, his ship's lost, just like in the original fairy tale. I don't know in real life why she ended up married to Pedro, but as I was writing, there just seemed like there were all of these parallels. They were at these luxurious palaces, but they were trapped in a way, just the way the Beast and Beauty are in the fairy tale, in that his condition made it so that there wasn't a lot else that they could do except live as human. He was a human marvel, and she was his wife, the producer of their children. And just I was always struck with the fairy tale, with how he's kind of like imprisoning himself in this castle, but by choice, but it's it's also safety from the outside world. And I feel like that's what the courts were for them to some extent. They were both prisons and also safety, because someone with his condition, I mean, as a young boy, as far as we know, he was kidnapped and he was brought to court in a cage. So somebody who looked unusual back then was often considered to be the property of whatever wealthy person could procure them, basically.
And that's a sad thing. When I was reading it, that was one of the things that struck me, because Catherine de Medici had the small people that were there, and then she also had Pedro, and it felt very bittersweet, because on the one sense of things, outside of the court life, they couldn't have a normal kind of life. They couldn't live their life as they could possibly do now, and be able to hold a job, be able to make a way for themselves. But at the same time, they were still property, and they were, made fun of in so many ways.
Yeah, they were. I mean, and her, she surrounded herself with, she with little people. She called them dwarves at the time,
Mhm.
because she believed that they were magical. I mean, that was her thing, was that she thought that these people were magical and would somehow, confer luck upon her. So she surrounded herself with them as much as possible. She also married them to each other without, I mean, they didn't have much choice in that, and tried to
Mhm.
essentially breed them just the same way she did Pedro. And I, but there's also this like flip side to it, because at least for them, not for Pedro, but for the small people in the court, when she died, she did leave a lot. She gave them money in her will, like she bequeathed you know money to them so that they could survive. So it kind of begs the question, how much did she see them as people, and
Mhm.
what kind of actual relationship did she have with them? And yet at the same time, she kept them almost like pets. So it's kind of like, I I'm very, very, she fascinates me because she seemed like such a woman of contradictions, I guess, as far as that, the keeping of people went.
She is just such a fascinating character in history that I like, both inside of history in and of itself, and then in historical fiction. I remember C.W. Gortner had a book, Catherine, the Many Confessions of Catherine Medici, which, yes, I could see you read that as well. I was often thinking about that book when I was reading your book, because I mean, it was so similar with the characters, and I could totally see it in everything that was going on in the timelines of things, and how she was as a person.
And it's so funny because I also read a biography of her that was basically, saying that she's completely misunderstood by
Mhm.
history, and that she was just a woman trying to hold on to power, and in whatever way she could, and as women tended to be throughout history, was slandered as a result of trying to be powerful. Um, so I don't know. I mean, there were certain points in history where she seemed to be trying to keep the peace between the Protestants and the Catholics in France. But there are other times when it seemed like maybe she was very much involved in their slaughter of one another. So she continues to just intrigue me. Like she's someone that if I could actually learn the actual truth of who she was, that would just make my day. 'Cause
Yeah, I know. If we ever get to have one of those celebrity dinners where you could sit down and talk with somebody from both past and present, I think you
yes,
and I could just both like sit down with her, have a dinner with her.
yes. Although, with the rumors about her poisoning people, maybe we just wouldn't.
Yeah, that'd be a thing. I just I'm gonna tell you all my secrets, but then you're not going to be able to keep
Right.
them.
Exactly.
I'll tell you everything, but you're gonna have to die.
Yeah.
Michelle, you're on mute.
It's fine. I was also really curious about the early years of Petrus's life, because before, like the years when he was living with Isabel on the island, was that were there any records of a historical record, or was that something that you had to construct
I
completely yourself?
I almost entirely constructed that. So what is known, or well, not known is a strong word. What is rumored is that he was from the Canary Islands, from Tenerife, and that he had a Spanish name. He had his name was Pedro Gonzalez, but the Spanish had taken over a few decades before the island, so it's not that surprising that he had a Spanish name. That's really all we know. We know, and he was about 10 years old when he was brought as a gift, I believe naked in this cage to King Henri II. And so his life before that is a mystery. So, I was trying to figure out who he might be, I just started researching other people with physical differences throughout history who have were in the public spotlight, and not all of them obviously, but there were a lot who were either given up as children or were sold to circuses or were that kind of thing. And so I decided to have his parents give him up, leave him on the church steps. And but I wanted him to have some knowledge of family life. I wanted him to have like a relatively nice childhood. So I invented Isabel, his essentially godmother, and or adopted mother, and her grandson are completely my invention.
I hope he did have, and I mean, not that to be taken from it would be terrible, but at least to have those early years, I hope that's how it happened for him.
And it's pretty much what it was for me. It was just wanting to give him something like something really nice, and
Right?
he had it, yeah. Because I I just I was trying to picture in this, if he was from Tenerife, what would his life have been like in this real, it wasn't a tiny community, but it wasn't a huge community, and he probably would have
Mhm.
been well known, and how would people have reacted to him? Um, that was, I guess in some ways that was a very fun part to write, because I got to give him something very happy, and or relatively happy, and I got to make it up without having to um, you know, kind of weave my way through history quite as much.
And you gotta love it because the Wikipedia warriors, they will come out for you if you get anything at all wrong.
Oh, I'm sure. Yes. Time. But you just do the best you can do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And I really like the relationship between Pedro and Catherine, and Catherine the wife versus Catherine de Medici.
Right.
I love their relationship together and that slow burn. And I thought it was interesting as somebody who, I think Michelle and I both love Beauty and the Beast. And we know the story where she just loves books, especially the Disney version of it. That's always a princess that we could get behind when it came to things. Um, and it was interesting that she made it so that she couldn't read.
Yeah. That I decided to do that because at her position as, this daughter of a merchant, even a wealthy merchant, there was a good chance she wouldn't have been able to read in those days. I mean, there's a
Mhm.
chance she might have also, but I kind of wanted that to be um, just one more thing that made them not understand each other as well. Because one thing that, from what I was researching, it seemed likely to be true about Pedro was that he was very proud of his education, and it would just be harder for him to um, know what to say to somebody who was not educated really in the way that he thought of education. um, and it just something for them to come to respect each other despite their differences, and to recognize, like, I guess like you do in a marriage, when you recognize strengths that you don't have in somebody else. And
Mhm.
so she had knowledge that he didn't have. She had an ease, with being outside in the world that he didn't have. And he comes to respect that about her, but it takes some time. Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, there was definitely the slow build into them developing their friendship. And when they call him a savage, you start to see it bother her
Mhm.
that her husband is being called the savage.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think at first, I was trying to put myself in the shoes of this like teenage girl, essentially married to someone, 20 years older than she was, approximately, who was, the butt of the court jokes in many ways. And I guess I wanted her to have glimpses of who he was enough that she could feel like a pang of sorrow for him and not just embarrassment for herself when he was called a savage. But um, to be honest, I had kind of a hard time at first. I rewrote it quite a few times trying to get her perspective in a way that I felt was both true to someone who might have been in her situation and that she wouldn't have been happy about it necessarily, but also where hopefully readers wouldn't hate her because she, didn't love him immediately. Because that just didn't feel realistic to me that it would be that, instant romance between them.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
having it the way you did made it very realistic and understandable, and you have that situation where she's stuck with him, not necessarily by curse. It's not like he's trapped her there in the palace. She's there by choice, and you still have to find this way to come to terms with each other. And I think in some ways yours is a better version of the Disney fairy tale because you don't have the Stockholm syndrome aspect of it that Belle has.
I mean, Beauty and the Beast has always been my favorite fairy tale, and I've always loved the Disney version, but the Stockholm syndrome thing is problematic. Definitely is. Because, yeah, there's no excusing him, really, like if you think about it too deeply at all.
I mean, in every fairy tale that's out there, there are the positives of it that you can take away with a story, like Cinderella. She's just an abused girl who's trying to survive, versus somebody who has everything just happen to her. And in Beauty and the Beast, I mean, she gets to see beyond the monster that he is, but at the same time, you've got Stockholm syndrome.
Right, exactly. It's a trade-off.
Yeah. Stockholm syndrome for a library,
I mean, not library.
And I do love the scene where she learns to read, like when she is able to get through a whole passage without messing up, and then she learns how to write, and she writes, the names of everyone in their family. That scene was really sweet to just kind of show, the influence that they've had on each other, and how much she does care, even though at that point so much had happened to them, and they'd been through so much that he didn't see how they would ever be able to come together again. But that was like a small sign that no, despite everything, she was still there for him.
Yes. And I think so much of what happened was out of their control. And I mean, I guess, it was because of his hairiness that their lives were the way that they were reliant on these royal protectors basically, and had to dance to the tunes of these royal protectors. But so yeah, but I didn't want her to turn away from him forever as a result of that. So yeah.
And I was reading somewhere that there are they had at least seven kids together, maybe more. I was reading in your author's note, and five of them had inherited his condition.
Yes, five for sure. One was unknown, and one historians think was probably not Harry. And then there are a couple of others where there are baptismal certificates for them, but you never see portraits and you never see any other record of them. So I'm not sure if that means that they died in infancy or what happened there, or sometimes the names got mixed up. Over the centuries, basically. Like Antoinette was by some historians, it turned out called by, I think it was I think Madeline's daughter's names, one of her sister's daughter's names or something like that. Um, and so it was very interesting trying to work through the historical records and figure out who was who, just because the names get switched around periodically. Um, but yeah, for sure they had at least 7 children, possibly more, and 5 of them were definitely born with his condition.
And it's
And I had read, oh, sorry, you go.
okay. Well, and it's, I think for me, and the hardest thing about the research has always been the names, especially in those time periods, going from the 16th century to the 17th century. There was this trend of naming the children for like if it was male, it was the father's father, then it was father, and they did the same thing with the women as well. And then if which I had in my last book, if a child died, the next child would be named for the child that died, which is all kinds of creepy in my opinion.
Totally. Yes. I mean, yeah, it almost sounds like you're replacing that child, just like slotting. I mean, I suppose it could be looked at just as an homage to just like any other, naming a child after a dead relative, but there is something creepy about it.
There's this attachment to it, and yeah, I'm reading a book on emotional trauma through generations, and there's this connection to it, and that's super creepy. I am sorry if anybody who has done that, please don't hate me. I find it creepy. That it's one thing if it's, you're naming after somebody's dead relative, that's fine. But if you're naming one child, you have a child named Rebecca, and then you name your next child Rebecca too. That's just so creepy.
Let them be their own person.
Yeah, let them have their own name, their own identity.
Yes. Yeah, I'm with you.
And I thought I had read somewhere that well, like you just said, actually, there are no portraits of any of the children that did not, I forget the hype, I'm going to mess up the name of it.
Yeah, hypertrichosis.
Who didn't inherit the condition. So I just think it's so sad that they were kind of cast aside for not being,
yes,
marvels, or however they would be described by the people who just like to keep them around to stare at them.
Right, exactly. No, the whole thing was it was just sad, really, the way that this family was treated. And the portraits were, a lot of them ended up in like these books, and at I believe it was at Ambra's Castle, although I could be at this point misremembering. And so they were in these like books of wonders, essentially, but they were cataloged not with human marvels, but with animals. So they were actually put with animals. And so it like begs the question, how many people actually saw them as human at all? And how many thought they were more like beasts, essentially? And that's kind of unclear. So that's one reason why when I had them, there's a scene in the book where they visit Switzerland, or they're passing through Switzerland, and they meet this physician who wants to document their condition for his own research. And that actually happened. He was a real person who really did document it, and he actually did document it in a very scientific way, and he referred to them as people specifically, which seemed important to me. Somebody recognized them.
Yeah. Oh gosh. No, you go. I just had another question and it just blew right out of my head.
Well, I think, and I was going to make a point that also with this book, it also shows how much we mistreat people with disabilities, even in today's standard, where you can see this happening in everyday life, where they're just we look at them as freaks, or we want to discount them and dehumanize them as much as possible, but they are still people.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that, I guess when, as I was writing this, it was just, they're just people who happen, these people in particular just happen to be hairy. I mean, they just happen to have more hair than the rest of us. Every other way, they were exactly like everybody else. And
Mhm.
I mean, and this is a condition that there have been only a handful of people throughout history who have had it. But there are some people alive today with it. And um, I've listened to interviews with them, and it was just interesting. There was I believe a girl in, I believe, Thailand, who ended up having laser hair removal, to to get herself less hairy in general, and like her whole family had it. And then there was a man, I believe, in Mexico, who kind of used it as a way to make money. He used his appearance, and I guess why not? Like that's but it's just very interesting to me that they're still newsworthy today. There's still people that you see in news stories or on websites that are less than that are kind of clickbaity, and
Mm.
things have changed, but not enough, I guess.
Mhm.
And my question came back and then it went
Okay.
away again. Oh my gosh, I should have written it down.
You should have. You should have written it down.
I should have. Well, while you were talking, it came back and I said, oh, good, I have it. And oh, that's what it was. I really loved, well, it was a sad passage because the story, it's so bittersweet. Like they have these moments of happiness and love, and then but when you kind of like zoom out at the larger picture, it's so sad. But when uh Girolama is gives birth to her son, and Catherine, is holding her grandchild, and she kind of feels that kinship with her daughter-in-law for, the way that her son is treating her as his wife, and how she doesn't know how to connect with her, but she wants to, apologize for her son's behavior and yell at him for being such a terrible person to his wife, and but she doesn't know how to break that kind of barrier between them, and find a way to bond with her daughter-in-law like that.
Yeah, yeah, that particular part was taken from actual research where um Henri, or Enrico, the husband of Girolama, he he really did apparently like come into Capodimonte, to this town, and see this young girl and decide he wanted her to be his wife. And because he was hairy, but he had the protection and affection of this very powerful family, the Duke of Parma, and then his brother, the Cardinal. And he basically went, I believe it was to the Cardinal, and said, I want to marry this girl. And the Cardinal was like, all right, I'll give you the money for her dowry, because she was the daughter of a bricklayer. And, so the Cardinal paid her dowry, kind of like I had it so that Queen Catherine paid Catherine's dowry to Pedro.
Mm.
And they were married, but in the town, everybody knew that she was in love with another man, and that didn't matter. Like he wanted her and he got her. So, and that was an interesting thing to me, because Henri, the hair, the hairy son, was just a fascinating character to me, historically speaking, because he was just treated as poorly as everybody else, but he seemed to be very savvy about how to use his condition to his advantage, and to his family's advantage. But it was not always good for everybody around him, like his wife.
Yeah, that was such a really uh, touching scene where she just kind of saw herself and she saw her past and so much in Girolama but she had no idea how to communicate that and how to tell her, you know, well, I'm here for you. You know, my son may have forced you into this situation, but I'm here for you. And, you know, I see that you love your child and you love my grandson. So, you know, I appreciate you for that.
Yes. Yeah. No, that I guess just with so much else, it's sometimes hard to say the thing that you really feel. Yeah.
So before we let you go, Michele and I have this super scientific survey that we do for every author now.
Okay.
And so we're going to have to present it to you. Now Michele likes to have everything in its place. There's a place for everything in its place. She likes her order. She likes to have everything nice and neat. I mean, even with her books, they can't be oddly shaped. They have to be all nice, right in a row with each other. But when it comes to her writing, she loves the chaos. She loves to just be surprised. Whatever the characters have for her for that day, that's what she's going to write. I, on the other hand, I enjoy chaos. I can't necessarily say I enjoy chaos, but chaos happens. I embrace it. It is a part of life. I do not need to have everything in a strict order. My books do not have to be in a very strict row of like height and everything. And I'm okay with that. But when it comes to my writing, I have a plot that I like to touch base with. I like to keep track of it. I'm very meticulous in my story. And in my writing. I think for my last book, I had to end up doing some pantsing. And I think every day that I was doing the pantsing, I was going to Michele, I don't understand how you can do this. This is terrible. I like having a plot. What is the matter with me? And I don't understand you. So now we're going to pose a question to you. Do you embrace the chaos of everyday life, or do you like to have everything nice and neat and orderly?
So I think in everyday life and in writing, I'm kind of the same. I like everything nice and neat and orderly in both, and it never actually happens in either one. Like when my house is actually, on the very rare occasions that things are in their place, I feel like I can breathe. But it's almost never like that. And it's the same with writing. I'm definitely a pantser. I tend to have, although I wish to God I could plot. Like I really do. I feel like that would make everything so much easier. But whenever I try it, I never am able to stick to it. Things happen. I don't know. And so when I write, I tend to, especially with a book like this, I tend to have like a document that has like a timeline so that I can at least keep myself on track historically. And I usually have another document that's like, you know, just like regular notes on like the characters' quirks that I want to remember, that I want to add in there, and maybe another document on like just like I have like 6 or 7 documents that are not actually the manuscript, that are just reminders to myself basically, but I have to remember where everything is. Usually I don't. I'm not entirely sure how I get books written, to be honest.
I feel like many of us as writers are like, I have no idea how I do it. I just do it. So I can't tell you how.
Yeah. It's a mess. Everything's a mess.
It's all part of the process though.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's all part of the fun of being in my brain.
Right.
Except on the days when you really don't want to be in it yourself.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
These days are sometimes many, but yeah.
Yes, no, that's I love the idea of plotting. I have tried I make lists of like, oh, and then this could happen, and then this could happen. And then like at one chapter in, I'll have already veered completely off course. So I went, oh well, we're going this way now.
That's what
It
happens.
was a fun idea while it lasted.
And I can never seem to plot the middles of books. Like I might know how to begin it, and I might know exactly how I want it to end, but I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get there. It's just, we'll see.
I feel like when it comes to the middles of the books, I like to have that, because that's where it gets sticky. That's where the temptation to be like, all right, I'm going to play with something else. That's when that happens.
Mhm.
But I think that's where I like to have the plot, is that I have this touchstone, this path that I can walk down. And if I want to stray from the path, I will go and I will venture down whatever rabbit hole the book calls for.
Mhm.
But I always have the path, or you say the trail of breadcrumbs that Hansel and Gretel leave along the way.
Yeah.
I have that to go back to be able to get to the ending that I want.
That sounds so lovely.
Mind you, I only do that in my writing because in my real world, there's a reason why you can see this part of my office.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, I so wish I was able to plot better. There's something in my brain where once I sit down, like I guess Michelle, does this happen to you? Things will just happen. Like I'll be writing and I'll intend for something else to happen, and then all of a sudden my characters are off, having a different conversation than I intended, or they're like, and I don't know. It just happens.
Well, I feel like there can be a point where the plotting could be too strict, and it doesn't allow for that leeway of these things happening. And sometimes you have to allow for those leeways of happening. Like when I do my plots, I sound like I'm like this massive, like, okay, you're really super detailed, and it's really just not. It's maybe a couple of pages.
8:23 a.m. The authors or the characters are here. Age 27. They move there.
Yeah, no, it is not like that at all. It's the dates. It's keeping point with, okay, I want this character to go to the market because she meets so and so at the market. And then at the next point, there's going to be an argument at this market or something else at the market. And then that's pretty much where I have the plot. That's where I like to have the plot, where it's plus, it gives me room to breathe as a writer, as opposed to just making really, really stuff. Like, I mean, I kudos to the writers who can use Excel spreadsheets for their
Oh, I'm
plots.
amazed by that. It's just like how I have no
My
idea.
brain, my brain cannot be that organized for that. So way too much organization for this brain.
Any opportunity I have to color code something, I will take. So maybe I should try plotting on Excel, because there seems to be plenty of opportunity to color code plotting on an Excel spreadsheet.
And a little behind the scenes magic with Michele. She likes to color coordinate our schedule for authors.
Oh,
So
that's
she
Yes, they
did that on
do.
the Excel spreadsheet for that.
I feel like it's always good to have someone, in a partnership who's able to do that kind of thing. So because then you have that structure.
Yes. Because I was like, you can do this? This is fun.
Well, it just makes sense. In my brain, it just makes sense.
So amazing to me.
So are you working on next project now, or are you kind of just enjoying a pause?
I'm working on a couple of things, one of which I've been working on for a while, and I'm stuck plot wise. Trying to figure out what's going to happen next. I've been stuck in this plot for a while. So I started something new that seems to be kind of fun. It's also kind of fairy tale adjacent. So
Ooh.
I just started a couple months ago, so I'm like reluctant to say that this is going to be my next thing, but it seems to be flowing right now. So fingers crossed. Yeah.
Well, it's always an adventure while you're getting to know the plot of your next story and your characters, and know what do you like?
Exactly.
Well, everyone, if you would like to order your own copy of Marvelous, please be sure to check out our show notes. You can click on the link to our bookshop on bookshop.org and order your copy. As always, bookshop.org does support our wonderful writers. It supports the podcast, but most importantly, it supports all the wonderful indie bookstores out there. And Molly, thank you so much for coming to hang out with us and just nerd out about all things marvelous.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Too, yes. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.